Buenas tardes. How's everybody doing today? I see we've got, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of your name, Mariushi, and Joanne's here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I know Joanne teaches Spanish. Mariushi, what do you teach? And Mariushi's excited to be here today's session. I'm excited to talk about this. High frequency vocabulary is my jam. Looks like Joanne has changed schools. Her previous school announced a salary freeze and elimination of pension payments for next year. I said, see ya. Awesome. Congratulations on your new job. And Mariushi teaches Spanish 9th and 10th grade. Awesome, awesome. You may not know, I used to teach high school. I taught Spanish in high school for 12 years. And I'm currently in middle school, and I teach 6th through 8th graders, levels 1 through 3. And she says, teaches mainly 9th grade. Awesome, awesome, awesome sauce. Well, today, as you know, we're going to be talking about high frequency vocabulary. So for those watching live and those who are going to be watching on the replay, welcome to Immediate Immersion Live, where we are all about comprehension-based instruction in the modern language classroom. And today we're going to tackle one of my favorite topics, high-frequency vocabulary. And if you have any questions or comments as we go along, please go ahead and put them in the chat. If you're watching on the replay, awesome. You can also put them in the comments, and I go back and check with you. Joanne says she's teaching high school, all levels, plus heritage speakers. Yes, we had a major turnover at my school this summer. 2 of my teachers, well, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us. Okay, never remember how many we have. We had 5 of us teachers, 1 French and 4 Spanish. Well, our principal moved one of our Spanish to teaching all English language learners next year without knowing that 2 other Spanish teachers were going to resign at the end of the year. One went to the high school and one left to go into the Department of Education. So we had to rehire 2 brand new teachers this summer, late, because these teachers resigned the last week of school. So we had planned on one of the teachers who left to teach the heritage speakers because our English language teacher used to do the heritage speakers, and now that's all been messed up. And so we had one of the new hires will be teaching the heritage speakers. I taught heritage speakers. How many years did I do that? 5? I taught in Las Vegas for 7 years, and I think for the first 5 I taught level 1 and level 2 heritage speakers. Yes, it is a challenge. Joanne says she's never taught heritage speakers before. It is a challenge. And I will say, although the kids were some of my favorites, the subject was not one of my favorites to teach. And not because, it's because I felt out of my element. I think I would have been better off with an English language credential. Currently, Mariushi, I am in California, right outside Sacramento. I taught in Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and here. Because Heritage Speakers is more like an English class where you're focusing on increasing vocabulary, correctness of writing, writing essays, reading literature, I didn't have that experience teaching those things. So it was always a learning curve for me, thinking about what to teach and how to teach it. We eventually turned it over to someone who had a dual credential in English and in Spanish, and it worked much better because they knew how to work with that. In our current school, we work more on the culture of being Hispanic in America and how to feel good about yourself being Hispanic in America, showing you your possibilities of going to college and doing things like that, um, with the language being in the backdrop. Let's see, we got lots of stuff in here. Joanne says a great thing is we don't have AP Spanish or French here at this school. The school is cutting back on APs across the board. I think a lot of schools are doing that, Joanne, because I think more value is placed in an IB curriculum than an AP curriculum currently, at least in California. When you go to your interviews and such at our colleges, one of the things they ask right away is if you went to an IB school. So I think they're putting a little bit more emphasis, and at least in California, you get more credits for passing the IB test than you do for the AP. And Joanne says we apparently have a true block schedule, which I have also never done. I've done all block, mixed block. I've done everything in between. Block is not my favorite for languages. Math and languages don't really like the block. English, science, and social studies enjoy it a lot. Elizabeth, welcome. Nice to see you. She's in Wisconsin, and she teaches Francais to grades 5 and French 2 to and 4 and 5 at the high school. Awesome. And it is rare to have a heritage speaker with French, but we have a heritage speaker with Haitian background. I will have him again next year. Awesome. And Mariushi also teaches on a block schedule. My current school, we used to have a modified block. So Wednesday, Thursday would be blocked. The rest would be regular days. But our current principal phased that out. And we're only have block days during statewide testing. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started. It's nice to see everybody here today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And so I wanted to talk about high frequency vocabulary. A lot of us talk about this. We hear the words, and we really don't know exactly where to start and what to do with it. And Elizabeth says, we have modified block like that. Pluses and minuses. Yes, there's pluses and minuses to everything. So before we had what we now use as a basis, a foundation, which we'll talk about in a moment, for high frequency vocabulary, high frequency vocabulary was all anecdotal. So what one person thought was high frequency wasn't what another person thought was high frequency. And I know in my school, like in Las Vegas, Joanne's asking about my lizard, raptor. He's an Argentine tegu. He's sleeping. He comes out in the morning at 6 in the morning, and he's up until about 1 or 2, and then he goes to bed to sleep. But he's right next door to me right here. But he's sleeping. He buries himself. So as a team in Las Vegas, we would come together, and we were using Cuéntame Más. I believe that's what it was called. That was the Fluency Matters curriculum. And we'd go through the next chapter that we were going to teach, and we discuss which words we were going to keep, which words we were going to throw out, and which words we were going to swap out. Because a lot of the words in there were not high frequency, at least what we were thinking. They had words in there like wolf and coyote, and then they had crow, and what else would they have in there? Can't think of one off the top of my head. They also had a lot of regionalisms, words that might only be used by Mexicans versus other Hispanics and might not be well enough known to be commonly used throughout the Hispanic world. So we would go through there and we said, okay, well, lobo and coyote are too similar. We need to get one of them out. Um, there's no reason to teach the wolf is my school's pet. Awesome. That's the word we actually ended up using because coyote was a cognate. The other was like, what was the other word that they had in there? Oh yes, they also had a like a not a, what's the word in English? A shepherd. They had the word shepherd in there, not high frequency at all, so we threw that word completely out. They had crow in there. We were taught in Las Vegas, so most of the kids knew the word for crow because of the liquor. But it wasn't a high frequency word, so we changed it to bird. So we had to do a lot of tweaking to the vocabulary because what the textbook thought was high frequency and what we thought was high frequency didn't coincide. So we worked through. And then we had conflicts amongst us, friendly conflicts, but conflicts because one of the teachers represented Dominican Spanish, one represented Mexican Spanish. My Spanish is mostly from Spain. So we had to do a lot of negotiating to find out what words we were going to use. Joanne says at my last school, I had to apply the National Spanish Exam by AATSP. They were crazy low frequency words like woodcutter, scythe, hut. Yes. We did that. We used to do that too in Las Vegas in the first couple of years, and we stopped because they were focusing less on proficiency and more on the grammar stuff. And I remember we were taking a practice exam, and they had words in there that you just didn't come up. I remember they were talking about the renal system in one of them, the kidney system. So I'm like, what school is going to teach that information? Unless you're going to be a doctor, that's not something that's going to come up. So yes, they were way outside there when it comes to high frequency vocabulary. I can't remember the exact year, but I want to say it's around 2013, but it could be different. So please don't quote me on that. But that's when we started to get, yes, that's what I taught, the level 3 exam, Joanne. That's when we started to get a good foundation for high frequency vocabulary. And that's when Dr. Terry Waltz, think of her name for a minute there, she escaped me. She came up with the idea of the Super 7 by taking these conceptual ideas that she learned through her pathway as an interpreter and found verbs to express those ideas. In Mandarin and Spanish, it's 7 verbs. In most other languages, it's only 6 because there isn't a difference between is located and just is. So the Super 7 is where they started. And although they might not be the highest of frequency words, what they were impactful, meaning that you got a lot of bang for your buck. They were high up on the frequency list, but they probably weren't the most frequent. But you got a lot of bang for your buck, meaning you could express a lot of ideas with just these 7 verbs. So no, you could not say things like walk and run and drive and fly, but you could say go, which was generic enough to express all of those ideas. You couldn't say I needed, but you could say I wanted, which is close enough to express the idea. And so it was revolutionary to start there with those words. Before that, as I said, the words just came from the curriculums we were using. I know Blaine's curriculum, Look, I Can Talk, we started with 100 TPR words, and a lot of them were not that common. Kick, I know, was in there. Jump was in there. They were action words, but again, not very useful when you're talking with people on a regular, everyday basis. And then Mike Pito came along, and he added 9 verbs to the 7 from Terry and came up with the sweet 16. Again, it's 16 verbs in Mandarin and Spanish, but for most languages it's only 15. And with those words, he expanded on her idea and came up with a set of 16 verbs that, again, were high frequency, but not the highest of frequency, but again, very impactful. And he was the first one to pioneer building an entire curriculum on these 16 verbs. That was the only vocab list kids got, were the 16 verbs. At my school, we pattern our curriculum also off the sweet 16. So that's where to start, the sweet 16. And then people ask, what about high-frequency nouns and high-frequency adjectives and high-frequency adverbs and conjunctions and such like that? You don't have to focus on those. That's the beauty of this. Because you need those words to be able to make sentences, you don't have to focus on those. Focus on the foundation, the sweet 16, and everything else will fall into place. You need nouns and pronouns and adverbs and adjectives and conjunctions to make sentences. So the kids will get them naturally through the language that you're providing. An example that I had when I taught level 1 a few years ago, these kids were starting to use tampoco, which means either or neither, and I'm like, where did you pick that word up? I've never written that word down. I never told you what that word means. And the kids go, but you use it all of the time. And the kids got the feeling for how it's used, even though they probably couldn't define it, in a word-for-word basis. They knew how to use it because I had used it. German is my major. I've never been able to teach it except in workshops. But when I do teach it in workshops, I use a lot of what's called particle words. We don't have them, I don't think, in English. These are words that give off emotions, but they're not translatable and they're not explainable. And you just use them, and my people in the workshop would pick up on these words as well because I use them in context. So, focus on the sweet 16 or the 15 if you don't teach Spanish, and everything else will fall into place as long as you are talking in your language and being comprehended by students. That's the foundation. But then, let's go into the actual high frequency. And more than a few years ago, but when I finally discovered these books, these are the best money I have ever spent in my teaching career. And these are frequency dictionaries. And I'm going to put a link in the comments here. And I will post it up there. Why is it? Okay, let's go mm.us/frequency. There it is. Okay, so mm.us/frequency will take you to an Amazon page. I'm not affiliated with Amazon, so I don't get any kickbacks with it at all. I just recommend these books, and these are, I think they have 14 current titles with different languages that put into context the top 5,000 words of that language. And these are the best frequency dictionaries that I have used. I have it in French, I have it in Spanish, and I have it in German. I buy the Kindle version, so I can always have access to them, but they come in paperback and in Kindle. But what's great about these is, number one, they list the words from 1 to 5,000. Then they also list those words alphabetically. So if you want to see which is more common, caminar or andar, you can look it up alphabetically and find out what number it is. It also, interspersed within the dictionary, they have like the top 10 food items, the top 10 subjunctive adverbs, the top 10 animals, a variety of things. German has like the top 10 verb kickers. And they might not be 10, they might be 20. It depends on what it is, but they have these little excerpts in there to help with it as well. What I love about these is it takes out all of the different nationalities. It's going just purely on the frequency. You can read in the beginning of them, they talk about how they got the frequency. But basically, they went through all registers, meaning educated and uneducated. They went through all the different modalities from literature to newspapers to TV, and they combined all of this and made a list. And it's agnostic to countries. So in Spanish, there's 21 Spanish-speaking countries. There are dozens of French-speaking countries. They didn't just pick Canadian French or Parisian French or French French. They took all of them into account, and they came up with a list. So when we are arguing, like my new team, we have me, who is Spanish, we have a Peruvian, and we have a Mexican. If we're going to have a conflict into which word we're going to teach, we can look it up in the dictionary, and it's going to tell us which one's most common, and that's the one that we're going to use. So I love that about the dictionary. Plus, I know the Spanish one better than all the others, so I don't know how this is impactful in the other languages, but the top 100 words count for 80% of the Spanish language. So if you really work on those sweet 16 and then add on that top 100 over your 4 years, you've really got a lot of language covered. Also, just the average person speaks using 18 to 2,000 active vocabulary on a daily basis. So these are the words that they actually use. It comes out of their mouth. Not passive vocabulary, which they recognize when they hear it or read it, but don't necessarily use it. Those are words like behoove. I know what that word means, but I don't use that word. It's just not a word that ever comes out of my mouth. So we're looking at active vocabulary. Now, I don't recommend trying to teach 2,000 words, and I don't even recommend, I used to recommend trying to focus on the top 2,000 and the top 100. But from my experience, less is more. The less we try to teach, the more we end up teaching. And the more we try to teach, the less we end up teaching, more gets forgotten. So I really, truly focus on the sweet 16 with a few additional words in there. And I focus on verbs because everything else will come because I've got to use other words to make sentences. So again, I highly recommend that you pick up, if you don't already have, the Frequency Dictionary for your language. They're awesome. The Spanish one is in the second edition. I know I've got both editions. I'm not sure if the French and German ones have been updated since I started. But that's where I go to. It solves any arguments. If you have to use a textbook, you can go through and eliminate words. If I had to teach from a textbook, I was required to do so. I would go through every chapter, which we're already going to go. Let's move on to my topic here since it comes right up here. Culling that textbook. I would go through every chapter, and if the word that they list in the back of the chapter is not in the top 2,000, it's out. I am not going to actively assess it. I might passively teach it, but I'm not going to actively assess it. It's not going to be on any test or quiz. And you'll find you're going to wipe out a lot of words that way. Because, like in level 1 in the school chapter, they teach things like stapler and paperclip and pushpin. Now, while kids are in school, they're at the height of using those words. But once they leave the school setting, they'll probably never use those words again. Chapter 5, Paso a Paso, Spanish 2, talked all about this playground equipment. Again, not high-frequency vocabulary, swing set, teeter-totter, playground. Unless you're a parent or you are a playground attendant, probably not going to come up in everyday conversation. So I would rather focus on more frequent vocabulary. You can practically wipe out the food chapter because almost all the words in a textbook food chapter are not high frequency. And I probably would replace, because I know there is like a top 20 in the Spanish one, food words. And most of those words aren't in the chapter, and I would put those words in and take out the other ones. Yes, Joanne says the car engine chapter or the exotic zoo chapter. They have some of these things in here. They're just not high frequency enough. And if you're going to be in a situation where you're going to need that vocabulary, you will pick it up naturally, just like you would in your own language. I don't know what all the parts of a car are called in English. But if I needed to learn that, or in the context of my job those things came up, I would pick up the jargon that goes with it. I didn't know all the words that apply to airline travel, but when I went to college, I worked for an airline, so I learned about all of these things like a PNR, a passenger name record, an itinerary, an open jaw itinerary, a single trip itinerary, a HIP itinerary, all these other things that I learned about because I needed to but didn't know before, even though it was my native language. So if we really need to focus on the highest frequency, Joanne says, I never learned that car vocab until I was getting ready to take the first car I bought in Mexico to the mechanic. Yes. It's just not, it's not important. It's not high frequency. Plus, we know when we try to teach all those words, the average textbook is 10 to 15 chapters with an average of 75 to 100 words per chapter. If you're expecting your kids to memorize 1,000 to 1,500 words a year, it's not going to happen. And you know this because it even was in my day when I took Spanish in high school back in the 80s. The first 4 or 5 weeks of level 2 was a review of level 1. I was so bored because I retained a lot of that vocabulary. But they reteach it all because they know you forgot it all because you possibly couldn't remember all the stupid vocabulary that level 1 taught you. Some of it was practical. Some of it is not. Teaching the numbers 1 to 100, not practical. Most of the numbers are not in the top 5,000. They're just not even in the 5,000. And I want to limit mine to the 2,000 because, as I said, the top 2,000 words is what the average person uses on a regular basis. Elizabeth says, so the French one looks to be from 2009. The publisher doesn't show any newer editions. Do we still think that it's fairly reliable? It's reliable enough. The language doesn't change that much where the frequency is going to change, I don't think. Even looking at the Spanish one, I have the 2 editions, and there's not much difference between them. You'll find, especially in the top 100, it's going to be like all the thes are in there. The pronouns are in there. Those aren't going to change, and they're still going to be very frequent. I think in the tail end words, the ones closer to the 5,000 might swap out, might be replaced by like new tech words that come into the language. But I don't think the core, and for all intents and purposes and our purposes, I think it's good enough. I really do. So I really wouldn't worry about that, Elizabeth, at all. But that is a good question. So you want to call that textbook. If you are using the textbook and you have to use the textbook, you want to go through and call those words to limit as much as you can. If you can get rid of the textbook altogether, that's what I advocate. But I know some of us don't have that option. I know in my last 2 schools I worked at, we did not have to use a textbook. So we built our own curriculum about what we valued to teach our kids. And as I said, in my current school, it is that Sweet 16 is what we focus on. Elizabeth says that makes sense. The slang and rejoinders might change, but probably not the basics. Absolutely. Mariushi says, how much are these high-frequency word dictionaries? They range in the $40 to $50 range, depending on whether you are getting a paperback or a Kindle version. Some of the more rare language, not rare, but the lesser taught languages like Arabic, Russian, Mandarin might be a little bit more expensive, but I think the Spanish one was in the $40 or $50. Joanne said, I had a colleague a few years ago who would begin Spanish 4 with a test of all the vocab from the entire Vista, Spanish 1 through 3. It was at least a couple of thousand words, and all the kids failed. I was her department head and tried to explain how insane her test was with no review was. Yes. We had a teacher. He was a great teacher. Elizabeth says, oh my God. We had a great teacher in the first school I taught at. He was amazing. But he was on the track of teach as much vocabulary as possible. And there's the first 1,000 words in books. I don't know if they still make them. They're children's books, like a picture dictionary. And I'll answer your question just one second, Mariushi. And he would teach all of those words in there and make sure the kids knew them. And he would take the pictures. He'd make a copy of the book, and then he would write in all the words next to little illustrations so the kids knew these words. But again, a lot of them were not high frequency. The way he taught them, the kids kind of learned them, but I still advocate for the less is more. Mariushi says, do you recommend that you provide the students a list of 5,000 high-frequency words? Absolutely not. I make available, but I don't hand out copies, the top 100 words, plus the Sweet 16. So there are 2 separate handouts for my class, the top 100 words, and then the top, and the Sweet 16. On my website here, immediateimmersion.com/resources, I have the top 100, I believe, in French and Spanish that you can print out if you'd like to give to your students if you want. And I have the Sweet 16 in Spanish, but not in French. And they're conjugated in present, past, and future. But you can get them for free there on my resources page. But no, I would not give them. I would not recommend teaching them top 5,000. Back when I did advocate teaching the top 2,000 over 4 years. So, 500 words a year. That was where, a decade ago before the Sweet 16. You're welcome. What was I going to say about that? I would have what I would call active vocabulary and passive vocabulary. Speaking vocabulary was active vocabulary. What I expected to come out of your mouth was the top 2,000. Anywhere from 2001 to 5,000 was your literary vocabulary. You recognized it when you read it or heard it, but it probably never came out of your mouth. But I would only actively work on teaching the top 2,000. But I don't advocate that either way anymore. I advocate for less is more because I found my kids retain more and learn more. If I only focus on the Sweet 16, my kids know a lot more Spanish. When I focused on the top 500 for each level, so 1 through 500 in level 1, 501 to 1,000 level 2, etc., my kids didn't have as much Spanish and couldn't talk and use as much Spanish as they can now because I focus on less. When the brain is not stressed by thinking, I've got to know 500 vocabulary words by the end of the year, it's more open and more sponge-like to absorb everything else. Because if I tell them, you only need to know 16 words by the end of the year. Now, you need to know them inside and out, but do that, they relax. They're like, I can do that. And they feel much more functional. Great questions. Our last topic is going to be called word murder. And I got this from Jason Fritz. And he said he got it from just elementary teachers themselves. And what he did to help expand students' vocabulary naturally was to commit word murder. So let's use, for example, let's use Spanish, and let's use bonita. That word is probably one of the first adjectives kids learn. And it's also one of the ones that is overused over and over and over again. But there are so many synonyms for that word that we can expand it. So once my kids know bonita really well, I have a section on my wall, which is the graveyard. And then I will make a tombstone. I will put the word that is no longer allowed to be used in class on that tombstone, like bonita. And then I would put off to the side next to it 2 or 3 alternative words that mean the same thing. So we could have hermosa, linda, things like that. And so we would put descansa en paz, rest in peace, put the word they could no longer use, and we would X it out. And then we would list 2 or 3. Bella is another one, yes. Another word you can put in there for alternative words. So the kids can look on that board and say, I can't use bonita anymore. Let me use linda or bella or hermosa. So it helps them teach some other words once they have the basics. And I would start doing that towards the end of, yes, guapa's another one. Towards the end of level 1, and then start killing off in level 2 a lot of the level 1 words. And not the Sweet 16, none of those words, but other really overused words like adjectives and nouns and such like that. So we can switch from persona, and we can go more specific into hombre or mujer, man or woman instead of just person. Lots of different things like that. But it helps you to expand the vocabulary naturally and slowly. I'm not like killing off 15 words on Friday and Monday you got to start using these alternative words. No, I'm killing off 1 word every couple of weeks that I like. Okay, I'm tired of hearing this word. Let's try to get a different word for that. And so it really does help increase their vocabulary to have this word graveyard. And you can kill off certain words. I do it also with adjectives in general, the common ones. Mariushi says, do you have a picture of the graveyard? I don't have one. This year when I do it, I will take a picture of it. I never thought of doing that, taking a picture of it. I always take pictures of my classroom at the beginning of the year, but my graveyard's never up that early in the year, so it's never part of those pictures. But that's a great idea. Thank you for sharing or asking. but I might kill off stereotypical adjectives. So I might say we're not going to be using let's see, yeah, we're not going to use gordo, y flaco, y bonita, y guapo. We're not going to use those superficial adjectives. So I'm going to kill those words off, but I'm going to tell them these alternatives are not synonyms. They're just different ways we can describe people, like generous and honest, nice, those kinds of words to get them out of there. Mariushi says, do you draw the grays? Actually, I cut out of gray construction paper, just like a little U shape, like a little tombstone shape. I cut them out, and then with a black Sharpie, I will write the word. I'll write de pe, descanse en paz, and then I will cross it off with red. I put that on a white piece of paper as a background, and then write the alternative words off to the left or right, whichever side I have the more room on. And I just tape it up on my wall. So I have a green piece of butcher paper attached to my wall. That's like the grass. And then I'll put the different tombstones up. You are so welcome. So those are my ideas about high frequency vocabulary. Start small with your Super 7. Expand up to your Sweet 16. If you have to teach larger amounts of vocabulary, use the high frequency dictionary in your language to call that textbook. And kill off overused words to help expand their vocabulary and their horizons. Does anybody have any questions or comments or other ideas? While you're thinking about that, please do like and subscribe. That really does help these videos get out to other teachers, and it's greatly appreciated. Joanne has an idea. She says, I forgot where I got this idea, but I put up a mirror last year and surrounded it with adjectives like inteligente, cariñoso, etc. And I have the Estrella del Dia choose adjectives about himself. That's awesome. And that's kind of like my idea of killing off, you know, the typical adjectives that all the kids learn: tall, short, skinny, fat, pretty, ugly, and using other characteristic adjectives to describe them. Mariushi says, great tips, Scott. You're so welcome. Elizabeth says, I like ditching the superficial words for the gentler language, a much better thing for class culture. Absolutely. Yes, and it gets away from the stereotypes and teaches kids other words that they can use to describe people. And Joanne says, I don't include anything purely descriptive. Absolutely. Also, before we go, I do want to remind you that we have our CI summer camp going on right now. All the classes have been, let me type it in here, have been recorded. We are on, which one are we doing this week? I think we are on, number 6 out of 10 today. 6, 7, 8. Yes, we're on number 6 today. Today is story asking. But if you register for it at mm.us/summercamp, you get access to all the classes, the live classes, which we have 5 left. and the pre-recorded ones, the ones that already have been recorded, through next year, August. So you have it all this school year and next summer as well, to help teach you about CI, remind you about certain things in CI, giving you helpful tips and tricks. It is a 10-part summer webinar series. So if that's something interesting to you, you can go to mm.us/summercamp to sign up. And I said you'll have access to all of the classes through August of 2024. The early bird special's over, so it's $97 for 10 classes. And all the information is on that link that I put up. I'll put it up here again. mm.us/summercamp. All the information is there. As I said, we've already had the first 5 classes, but they're recorded. You can watch them. You can ask questions. There's comments there. And then we've got 3 classes this week and 2 next week. And that will finish it out. And you have access to all of them through August 2024. The topics we covered was an introduction to comprehensible input, conversations. The Sweet 16 is on there. Conversation, story asking, picture talk, movie talk, reading, and creating lesson plans. I think those were the 10. I think I got listed them all. Joanne says, thank you so much. I hope to be able to make more Monday sessions now that I have moved. Awesome. I would love to have you with us, Joanne, more often. So if there's no more questions or comments, I will let everybody go. We will meet again next week. I'm still planning what we're going to talk about next week, but next week, same time, same channel, 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern. And I hope to see all of you back next week. Mariushi asked, how long are the sessions for the summer camp? They generally are about an hour or less. About an hour or less. At least so far. None of them have lasted over an hour so far. And at most, they might be an hour and a half, but I don't think we'll get there. But if they get longer, that's where it'll be. You're welcome. Okay, with that, I will say goodbye to everybody. Have a great week, and I hope to see you next week. Have a great one, everybody.